It's not every day that you travel to a new city and find yourself at the back of a police van. I think it's time I told you all the story of my first trip to Paris. Welcome back to another video, guys. This one's going to be a little different than usual. I just felt like sitting back, relaxing and sharing the story of my first trip to Paris through film photography. So here's a backstory. Back in November 2021, my friend Sham, storyteller, filmmaker, designer, you name it, he asked me to go on a spontaneous trip with him to Paris. I'd never been personally, but he had, and he wanted to grab a few pictures whilst out there, and I thought it was quite exciting to, go on this sort of creator trip. But given the fact that we were only going to be there for about 2.5 days, I decided to put down my digital camera and use my film one a little bit more. And if you want to know why that is, I've made a whole separate video on why I've been into film photography lately, so check it out. I also decided to leave my drone behind because we'd be mainly in the city centre, and I knew that it'd be very difficult to navigate using it without getting into trouble. Anyways, here's how our little trip went down. We both took separate flights to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, where we then met up, took a taxi all the way down to the Latin quarters. We quickly grabbed a bite to eat and then headed to sleep, because the next day was the only day out of the week which actually had a bit of sunshine, so we thought we'd make the most out of it and see as much of Paris in the sunlight as we could. So we headed off in the morning to Pigalle, where Sham really wanted to capture some pictures in the famous basketball court. We decided to walk because even though it would take us 40-45 minutes, at least we'd see part of the city along the way. And the light was hitting this city differently. And we're walking up these steep hills towards Pigalle, and along the way, this is one of the first shots I took that I really loved. Like, the aesthetics of this little bakery was everything, like the shop name, the font, the colours. I just loved it. Paris is just such a beautifully designed city, it's crazy. And even the cafes, I love European cafe culture, such a vibe. And a little further on in our walk, I saw this lady sitting alone. She caught my eye and I snapped this photo. Just enjoying her own company. Maybe she was waiting for someone, I don't know, but sitting in the sunlight, it was just a great photo. And you've got all these hand sanitizers too, reminding us that COVID obviously still existed at that time. It was still a big thing. And it just also reminds me of that sense of isolation that a lot of us had to deal with. We spent a lot of time alone, and I personally spent a lot of time just reading in my garden, just bathing in the sunlight whilst the streets were quiet and empty. And so it just kind of reminds me of that time. Then we arrive at Pigalle Court, and to our surprise, it's closed. We couldn't find any obvious reason for why that was. All we knew is that the gates were locked and we took a massive L. And so my friend Sham decided to set up his drone because he's gonna send it above the court to try and snap up some photos. But for some reason, the sun wasn't really hitting the court in any way, which is kind of what you want for a good picture. It was winter, so the sun was obviously quite low, and these sort of towering apartments behind us were blocking the sun from hitting the court. So we were like, yo, let's just take what we can and keep it moving. So I took a couple of shots from just outside the gates with my film camera, which I really love. The way these basketballs were seemingly just placed there just made for a pretty cool scene. And then whilst we just stood there sort of feeling bummed out about this whole situation, I decided to just look up and look around at this, where we were. And that led to one of my favourite pictures of the trip. This man who was living above the court basically decided to pop his head out to water his plants, I think, and I managed to capture it. And the way the sun was just bouncing off him and his white outfit, just perfect. If I had just kept my head down, focused on the court, or just had tunnel vision towards what we were trying to achieve, then I wouldn't have caught this moment. And so I really love this picture because sometimes you've got to stay open to things outside of your plan. You just got to be ready to ride whatever wave comes your way, and often those end up being the best memories. And this picture by the river was really nice. It just reminded me that even though Paris is a really beautiful city, there are always things that are hidden in plain sight anywhere you go. And just the contrast here between the expensive homes and the homeless guy, powerful. I love this picture too, just because it looked like something out of a Wes Anderson movie. If you know, you know. And even this one here, I love the roadside bookstore. I love that the culture of reading is so visible in Paris. It's not really like that in the UK. In London, we mainly have people kind of on their laptops with their headphones on in coffee shops. They're not really reading most of the time. And so it's just like refreshing to see that sort of thing. The next thing we realized is that there were a lot more places closed off than we thought. We hit up the Eiffel Tower, but the famous sort of stairs or something were like boarded up. I'd never seen them before, but apparently everyone goes to take their picture there, so, you know, we missed out on that. Although I still wanted that cliche Eiffel Tower pic, which I managed to get, which was, I think, really nice. But there was also this one area sort of around where we were staying that streets were closed off by the police. There were television crews set up on the street, and they were telling us that it was a funeral procession for someone quite important. Still don't know who that was, but it meant that we couldn't go to some places, including the Pantheon, which was closed. Very often when you're dropped off in a sort of foreign place and foreign timeline, it really just humbles you because, you know, things don't always go to plan. You know, you might have plans, but God plans better. And so by this point, we spent half the day trying to run around Paris, being let down in trying to capture whatever we were trying to see. So we're down bad at this point, okay? Things are not going in our favor. Anyway, we grabbed some late lunch, grab a coffee, and decide what we're gonna do next before sunset. Now, I personally wanted to go to the Louvre, okay, because the next day it was gonna be closed for whatever reason. It was now or never. But Sham really wanted this sort of sunset picture from the Arc de Triomphe, and I decided to sort of just go out and help him out. I thought, you know what, I can always come back to Paris and do the whole museum thing later. So we jump in a taxi and we're headed towards the Arc de Triomphe, but there's a lot of traffic, and I can tell by this point we're not gonna arrive there in time for sunset. So instead, we jump out just before the Arc de Triomphe. We're like 5 minutes drive away, and we go down a few side roads, and Sham decides to send his drone up to capture a bit of footage whilst there's still a bit of light left. Now, here's where things got a little bit sticky. Drones aren't really allowed in most cities, especially if you're in a crowded area, and most importantly, if you look like us. And I was paranoid as hell for whatever reason that we were just gonna get caught. It's not like a major crime to be using a drone in a city, but you can get in trouble. And I'm a good boy. But it wasn't Sham's first rodeo with police for using the drone, and he had previously used it in Paris without any issues, so he still wanted to do it. And so we're sitting at these little crossroads, and I tell him, look, I'm gonna sit across the street. I don't wanna get caught up in the trouble if that's what happens. But you know what, I'll keep an eye out for you. 5 minutes in, a police car goes blazing past with the sirens on, and I know that they're looking for us, okay? I'm sweating by this point. 10, 15 minutes in, and the sun has now set, and so this little drone is up there, lit up like a mini helicopter. And I'm telling him to bring it down. A van pulls up right in front of me, like 2 people sitting in the sort of front, and I'm trying to use my detective skills. I'm trying to figure out, like, is this an Uber? Why isn't the passenger getting out? Or are they here to pick someone up, but like we're the only ones around? Like, what the hell is going on? Then the guy in the passenger seat leans forward and looks up, and I read in massive letters on his back, police. And I'm like, uh-oh. I start texting Sham, like, bring it down and out of sight. But when I look across the road, like 5 police officers are coming around the bend, and of course, they spot him. And so I walk over to them, and they've got a gun to his head. I'm just joking. I was like, hey guys, I'm his friend. Like, is there an issue? Did he do something wrong? They're like, yeah, this isn't allowed. And I was like, what? I never knew that. And Sham was just sort of standing there looking all quiet and vulnerable. It was kind of funny. He had just sort of accepted his fate. And so they search him up and down, and they're telling me that they need to question him further at the police station. And then they're like, you can come too. And so they search me, and I'm like, okay, sounds fun. So we're sitting at the back of this police van, 2 officers sitting in front of us, 2 facing us, 2 driving, like one in the driver's seat, 1 in the passenger seat. And the driver is moving nuts. He's putting his foot down, he's driving onto the curb, and we're like driving like this, and then he's splitting apart all the traffic. And I'm looking outside and looking at all these regular people watch the van go, like, drive down. And I'm thinking, am I a criminal? Okay, I knew I wasn't in trouble, and Sham, like, was pretty chill about it also. I was smiling under my mask, and he was smiling because he found it funny that I found it funny. And believe me, I would have recorded the whole experience if I didn't think they would shoot me if they saw any sudden movement. So I just sort of like stayed quiet and like was looking out the window, just enjoying the experience. Anyway, we crossed the whole of Paris in like 20 minutes, and we jump out at the police station. They tell me to wait outside for a couple of hours whilst they speak to him. I snap this legendary picture as he's walking in. I go to the local bakery, eat a baguette, as you do, and eventually they let him out. And he's telling me everything that they said, all the questions they were asking him, and how he had to wait for a prosecutor to decide whether or not he was able to keep the drone the next day, But yeah, overall he was like, they were actually quite nice about the whole thing. They followed protocol, they were completely professional with him, they understood that he was a filmmaker, so they were actually really nice to him, and yeah, they just apparently handled it really well, so shout out to the French police. And on the taxi ride home, I was like, I told you so, like, was it really worth it? You took a massive L, like the good friend that I am, obviously. And he's rubbing his hands like, did I? And he pulls this out of his sock. It was his SD card. He still had his photos. He started dancing, I started dancing, even the taxi driver started dancing. So yeah, that was my first trip to Paris. It was a hell of an adventure. I didn't think it would end that way, but you know, we saw a lot, we had a lot of fun, drank a lot of coffee. But they did end up confiscating Sham's drone. The prosecutor decided that he wouldn't get it back, which really sucked. And looking back at it all, that race against the clock, that struggle to try and capture the perfect moment, made me realize just how little people know about the stories and journeys behind our favorite pieces of content. It's not always smooth sailing. It's not as easy as clicking a button. It's everything around it and leading up to it that adds value to it, that makes it special. And so when I look back at those first film pictures in Pigalle Court, who would have thought it'd be foreshadowing an encounter with the police? Now the picture acts as a reminder that the content that's often most celebrated is also what can get us into the most trouble. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel and newsletter for more, and drop a film emoji if you made it this far. Otherwise, I will see you very soon.